Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know The Penguin, Season 1, Episode 6, Gold Summit. My name is Grace. And of course, I'm not alone. I'm here with the one and only Mike Bloom. Mike, how you doing?
Grace, I am going to metaphorically crack open a can in solidarity
Mm,
with you. Today is the day we take RHAP.
that's right. Gold Summit. Yeah, we'll
Gold
take
Summit
over.
does sound like the name of the beer that they were
It
drinking,
does
like the
sound like the
knockoff brand.
I was gonna ask them what brews do you think are cooking in Gotham, but Gold Summit might be one of them.
Yeah, so indeed, I think I had speculated last week that it was going to be like some sort of criminal convention, and it seems like Oz is trying to start one. Basically, that like this is going to be a brokering of negotiations to do the impossible, to get all the criminals on one side to go against the rich, to eat the rich. Grace.
They're gonna eat them. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, Vic had some squid this episode, so
That's true. Yeah, and we did not see what happened to the body after Vic killed him. It is possible that he may have eaten the body.
that's, I was like trying to rack my brain about is there like an undead calamari monster villain in Batman? And then it was like, no, it's just Vic ate the body. Well, we're gonna recap Gold Summit. People should make sure that they are subscribed to the We Know Scripted TV podcast feed to get our recaps of episodes, get the Tastemakers, TV for Real, the weekend program, and everything else we're doing here. You can also watch us on YouTube. Search We Know Scripted TV on YouTube and subscribe to that as well, and you can get notified when we have new videos up. Mike, this was an episode that there is a little bit of action, like the things happen, but in terms of feeling actiony, it maybe feels like a little bit of we're a little bit slower. I think this is a lot
Mm-hmm.
of character stuff. Even the Vic Squid stuff is a lot of fueling Vic's character and him moving forward. There's a lot of Oz and his mom, and then obviously Sophia and what is going on with her, and particularly I feel like a very strong scene between her and Eve. Where should we start with Gold Summit, Like,
Yeah. I mean, this does feel like one of the more disparate episodes. I mean, I don't even call this chess PC because I think there still is kind of like a general speed and momentum that the Penguin has from a plot perspective. It does feel like we slowed down a little bit from like the streak we were on for episodes 3 and 5, but I think especially given the image that we leave the episode on, we are in for like an absolutely climactic penultimate episode. So I guess let's start with like the status quo of things, Grace, because it seems like we have changed seasons, even though a season 2 is not on the horizon as of yet. It's
there's
snowing.
a little some
Oh,
people
okay.
reading into the showrunners comments recently, which we'll talk about that later, because I think focus on the episode and then chat about maybe what's on the horizon for the Penguin. But yeah, we do have this new landscape where like Sophia and Sal are like living together. He's like he's making breakfast. You want to start there? Dr. Rush and Sophia are definitely together. They're not living together. They're sleeping together. Although,
Yeah, from like Sophia's perspective, it's more so that he's kind of just like a warm bag of meat. Like just looking at their post-coital interaction, he is just an absolute lovesick puppy, but also like self-flagellating at the same time. It's interesting because Sophia was the one to kind of shake him back into reality and be like, snap out of it, stop stop like essentially intoxicating yourself with these drugs to forget what you did. And now he's like in a mood of incredible penance, basically being like, oh, I hope you like that, I deserved every bit of it, or him basically offering up his services, aka mental torture, for if and when they capture Oz. So yes, something briefly to stop in on. And listen, now that Squid's wiped off the board, probably the thing I like least about the show, but then moves into a much more, it's not to say heartwarming, with the very perverse relationships that exist within this show, but I mean, a very interesting dynamic here between, these new family members. The Gigante Maroni alliance has officially been solidified, and we get a scene here in the kitchen that is sort of reminiscent of a father and daughter.
yeah, I mean, this is what happens last week is basically Sophia being like, I'm like the way you look out for your family. That's how I wanted my dad to treat me. Like that would be pretty nice. And so we do get this, and there's this moment where what were they making? I couldn't quite catch, but all I know,
They were making it was like a Persian dish, Korish bademjan. It is like
okay.
a stew.
And Taj would like yogurt on his. And when Sophia does try hers, she says Taj was right. And I do get this feeling. I don't know. Do you read into anything of the way he kind of is like, yeah, Taj. Like he's kind of like, I feel like there are ways in which he feels similarly about his son in ways that I think probably Carmine felt about his son, but I feel like Sal has more of the thing of like, that's your family. Like you just gotta look out for them. Like I don't know, the way that he's like kind of reminiscing about Taj here makes me feel like the way I think that Sophia is probably projecting a level of family closeness that maybe is not actually there. I don't know if you agree or
I
not
don't know.
with
Well,
that.
I mean, listen, compared to her own dad, he's basically,
Right.
insert every sitcom dad here that, like,
Right.
she's surprised that he knows how to cook, that he had such an emotional reaction to his wife and son being killed. From her
Right.
perspective, like, her dad got her mom killed to try to get her out of the way because she knew too much. So I think it still is even if it is a little bit of postulating or projection on her part, it still is a bit of a surprise. I mean, again, I'm trying to figure out like how much of a jump did we take here? Because now the operation from Oz's perspective is like not exactly completely up and running. They're definitely in the quite literal seeding phase of their business, but like definitely a marked shift from the way the episode ended with 2 buckets and a podung generator. So that's going to imply how much time the two of them have spent together. Obviously, now it's assumed that Maroney is like living in the Falcone estate, which is also very interesting from a thematic perspective
Mhm.
of like, yeah, and he's now quite literally staying in your family home.
Yeah. Yeah, my guess is I don't know, more than a week, less than a month. I don't know if that's too
Mhm.
broad of a time period to like assume that move forward. But that's sort of the notion I get. Like enough time that they can have been basically they had to grow more bliss. So maybe it is even more than a month is feasible because they had to grow more and then distribute it. They seem to have enough that like when they want to just go give it out for free, they have enough as well. So we could be talking about a much longer. This is one of those things I would kind of like them to just say like this is how much time it's been. I
Yeah,
do
just give us a
understand.
subtitle,
I know.
people. Come on.
I understand if you like that's a thing that then people go back later and be like that doesn't make any sense. It's like God, I don't know. I do just like the comfort of the title card that tells us it's 1 month later or whatever, but we don't get it. But no, I would agree that this piece in particular Dr. Rush and Sal and Sophia sort of all living together is probably, I would agree, the weakest part of this episode and sort of the least interesting thread for me so far. And I think if I have to pinpoint why that is, I actually think I talked about this up front. There's a couple of scenes in the episode that I think are spectacular. So this is not to indicate that I'm not enjoying this episode. But I do think that there's a way in which the show has continually surprised me with the way that interactions and then therefore like alliances and enemies have shifted throughout the game. I almost hesitant to do this, but we could talk a little bit about Survivor, in which like it does feel like an old like an if the Penguin was made 20 years ago, it's maybe more like an early season of Survivor. And what I feel like we've been getting is like voting blocks, Mike, of like
Yeah.
you never know who's going to be aligned with each other by the end of the episode, and we've been moving at such a frantic pace. This feels much more traditionally television, and that's not to say that it's bad, but there's a pace that the show has set that then I'm like, oh, they're all still aligned with each other by the end of the episode. That's a little surprising for the Penguins so far.
Yeah, but, we're coming across the last 2 probably bloody episodes. And let's talk about the person that I wouldn't say much to my chagrin because, like, objectively, I don't want the character to die, but from my own preseason prediction path, it'd be optimal. Let's talk about this Sophia and Eve scene because, again, while I do feel like from a pacing perspective, this is probably one of the slower episodes in comparisons to the past few weeks, it contained some really, really fun pairings, including a couple of scenes you highlighted earlier. And here is one of them where, I think both women kind of come into this scene with one perspective and they both leave with a completely different one. Like they're both kind of having their walls broken down in a different way,
Mm.
where Eve is able to obviously like save her own life by talking about, the community that she has garnered and how much utility there is in surrounding yourself with people who want to protect you and will turn down any sum of money to not give away your location in exchange for you protecting them. I think from Sophia's perspective, like that's the definition of love. That's the definition of loyalty. On the other side of things, Eve receives some very key information from Sophia as to what Oz may or may not have withheld from her over the past decade, and how that causes her to make what I assume will be perhaps a bit of a polarizing choice among the fans of this show, which is to out the location of Oz.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing for me after one episode of the show that I was the most drawn into was the theme of identity, and the theme of, in the case of when we first meet Oz and Vic, it's these individuals who are living with disabilities and who are underestimated and looked down upon, and they are going to turn that around, and use it to their own benefit to thrive in a world where you can overcome that. I think that I didn't have a lot of expectations, especially Eve as a character, in terms
Mhm.
of it could have very easily become extremely tropey in terms of her
Right.
role in this story of just using Oz for money, kind of doing whatever she needs to do. And there's so much more depth here. I thought this was incredibly nuanced and really
Mhm.
well told, the scene of they both come in with assumptions about the other one. Basically, Sophia's playing into what I essentially thought was the character of Eve. And Eve says, I don't know that, and even she's making assumptions about Sophia as she is balking at her point, which is that you don't understand that there is shades of gray in the way that these type of relationships work out. That of course he pays me money and gives me very
Mhm.
nice gifts. That does not have to mean that I actually secretly hate him and I hate everything about him.
Right.
This is a thing I always feel like watching Succession and getting to talk with Dr. Mann about it. I always felt like I got to take these like things that I love to apply to other television shows. And one of them was when we talk about Succession was the characters were so like they were more than one dimensional in the way that someone would be like, we'd be asking yourself like, why did they do that thing? And I'd be like, well, I actually don't think it's any one particular thing that drives them. And in this scenario, this is exactly this, where Eve's like, just because he does pay me money does not mean I don't think that there are good things about this. I think that's what she's implying. And that she understands that there are also bad things about him. I mean, it
Yeah,
is
I mean, she calls him like, yeah, I know he's a liar and a
yeah,
narcissist and he kills people.
yeah, literally one episode ago, he does have the like kind of like the reaction that you would from a like bad boyfriend or partner, which is he starts destroying and like wrecking things in the apartment. Like bad reaction from your part, like if that's just happening, big red flag. But at the same time, it's very nuanced, and she's in a situation where it is not as simple as to just say that she can like not have him in her life on moral grounds, or that he's in her life purely because he pays her a lot of money. And so I thought that there was such a great conversation, and the way that Eve has built herself up in her community, and the way that she looks after her community, and they do not rat on each other because they're all in these like very precarious situations of people
Right.
who go into this type of work are often extremely vulnerable people, and so you need that type of protection in a way that I thought, Mike, this is the first time I felt in a while that like like, is this show actually what we thought it was at the beginning, which is like, is is Oz the actual villain? And so in my head it was like, well, maybe he's just he's evil, but he's an anti-hero. i
Mhm.
i, I don't know how and like the answer is probably just like, as Eve says, it's not black and white. It's shades of gray. This show is not actually interested in being a traditional, like, here's the hero, here's the villain. But this is the most I've been like in this conversation between Sophia and Eve being like, I think these might be the good people. And that's wild to think because Sophia killed her whole family 2 episodes ago.
Well, what I think is so interesting, and maybe it's just something that I have sort of pulled my head out of, been able to see the forest a bit more amidst all the great stuff that's been happening, but like getting a real classist narrative coming out of especially this episode. I mean, obviously, we'll get into Oz's rousing speech at the Gold Summit, basically being like, hell, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. You'd rather all work together than work for the people that don't even know your name.
Yes.
And here it is a little bit of like the other side of the tracks, right? That like there are these two women, one of whom was basically born into a certain position in society, but still felt kind of cast down, and someone that pulled herself up by her go-go bootstraps and
Mhm.
was able to make a living for herself. And it's always so interesting to see the grass always be greener, right? To have Eve sort
Mhm.
of remark to Sophia of like, you don't know how lucky you have it of like what I've had to do. But then as Sophia turns the gun down on Eve, she says, whatever I was born into, I'll never have that. And so it's interesting to sort of see like the admiration that Sophia does have for Eve there. And, despite the fact that she is now officially the head of this family, making a new family, trying to make these connections, there is still, I think, this gap that needs to be filled in for her of like, I want to earn that respect and I want to build a community of people that respect me, not necessarily fear me. The fear is already there. I shot Johnny Vitti in the head point blank, but it needs to transition into respect. And I think she had every intention of killing Eve or getting something out of Eve,
Killing Eve is a different
I know
show.
exactly. A lot of are they villains or villanelles here, Grace, in the show? But I think that she came into the apartment certainly with a course to do something with her. But I think it honestly was getting the chance to sit down and like hear about it, and to also have Eve, whether or not it was a ruse, tease a little bit of like, okay, maybe I'm starting to bite at you not really being the hangman and killing my girls. That's not who you really are. Which is, again, Sophia's having someone believe her for the first time in a decade is basically hearing the right thing at the right time. And then, to add on to it, then she basically gets an informant now. And it's almost like Eve is now working for her by the end of this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I give the show a lot of credit. They Lauren LaFranc is the showrunner of the show. She had worked on Agents of Shield. She worked on Chuck for a bit, but I believe this is her first show running gig. She was an executive producer of a YouTube premium show called Impulse, but this is her first work. Show running, and this was like just very good. And I not that other like a man who was show running couldn't have like worked in the scene, but I do think this feels like Lauren LaFranc potentially putting a little bit of her spin on the show, because I think what ultimately bonds them in this moment and realizes that they need to have each other's back is that they are the class divide between a lot of the characters on the show is definitely true. There's this moment where Oz looks out the window and the entire city on the west side is all lit up, right? That's definitely a theme of this. What bonds these two women together is despite the class that they were born into is just their gender. Is like the way that they are treated as women in this society, that even if Oz thinks that he loves Eve, he is not willing to like not put her in harm's way. He's not willing to keep her entirely out of the way, in the same way that Sophia feels like that her father was not willing to protect her lover, was that whatever love there was not worth not putting her in Arkham. For Eve, it was not, the fact that Sophia ends up finding is arguably the fault of Oz, who has like roped her into this whole thing. So I just really loved this scene. I really loved this encounter, and I mean, like, I love the way it makes me think about like, who am I rooting for here? Like, I really don't know, because what ends up happening as a result of this is that Sophia's holding a gun watching Oz's mom dance. I'm very worried.
Was it a gun? I thought it was a crowbar.
Oh, it's a crowbar. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. I literally did that in my notes. I wrote like holding a gun, looked again. I was like, oh no, that's a crowbar. Like, she's literally, maybe about to kill Francis Cobb. So I'm gonna say fun, Mike, and maybe that's not the right word here, but I thought very fun. Very fun.
I think it was a really enjoyable scene and a very surprising one at that. Again, not to say that this is not necessarily something that is welcome within this world, but like, again, the show is called The Penguin. He's the most recognizable character, came from a movie, Oscar winner starring as him. You would expect that like he would be the end all be all central focus. And that has been the biggest happy surprise for me, has just been the development of Sophia Falcone and Kristen Miliotti's performance, and sort of following again these two almost parallel trains, but on very different paths. And sometimes they intersect on similar values, and sometimes they veer entirely off course. And now they're about to collide once more. This will be the first time, assumingly, that, I'm not sure what Oz is going to do after, his big victory lap at the Gold Summit, but assuming he's going to come back into a scenario where Vic and Francis are under attack by Sophia, this will be the first time that they've seen each other since, he was revealed to be double dealing and selling out the bliss. And also that he killed Alberto. So that should be incredibly interesting, because while Oz right now is almost at an all-time high, I wouldn't say Sophia's at a low. Again, she is the
Mm.
head of her own family, succeeded in her goals of like weeding out all the traitors, but has not really like gotten that final monkey off her back, which is killing the weed, as Sal
Mm.
put it. This is a guy that just keeps popping up no matter how many, different products that you could use. She is trying to get to the root, and it lies at the family tree.
Yeah, so let's chat about where this takes us to Oz and Vic and his mother, Frances, this episode. Not Vic's mom, that's Oz's mom.
No, Vic's mom got swept away quite a while ago.
Which is it opens with this like they do it as kind of like, it seems like it's a monologue, and then it turns out that it seems like it's talking directly to the camera. Turns out
I mean, he
like
quite literally says at one point, "Goodfellas," and I'm like,
that's right.
This can't be coincidence, right?
No, it's definitely in there on purpose. But delivering this sort of rousing speech to the people who are working there. They seem to have a very successful operation going on. They get a little bit blocked when Sophia and Sal ultimately decide to kill a bunch of just like corner drug sellers, basically trying to send a message of like, if you
The
work with these
Sullivan
people,
lads.
yeah, if you're working with them, you are in danger. Trying to disrupt a potential alliance with the Triad. Ultimately, they bring together this meeting of all of the different sort of warring cartel factions, and have a toast. All the while Vic is figuring out how to navigate Squid, and they're both sort of trying to help out with Frances, as like the power is out basically all the time in Crown Point, so it's very cold. And she's also has dementia. Or actually, I thought very interestingly, like I was basically like, I actually don't know what's happening with my mom,
I mean,
and it's like all of these things probably, but no doctor
he
can
quite
tell me.
literally says Lewy body, which I believe is like
Okay.
one of the more common forms of dementia. So like
Okay.
it's actually confirmed. I mean, again,
Right,
a
because they
little.
thought he thought that they had they just like they diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then realized no, it's not that, and then they said, well, it's probably Alzheimer's, and then they diagnosed her officially.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was such a great episode for Deidre O'Connell. She had some really, really great scenes. I want to dial in especially to the scene between her and Oz in a little bit, and how, again, even at her most powerless, she is still trying to execute that power by being like, I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. But speaking of power, I love that as a literal theme in this
it's very good.
episode, right?
The power struggle.
Yeah, the idea that Crown Point can't get power. They can't get electricity because all the rich have the power. They have all the electricity siphoned to them to keep their houses warm. And so what Oz is jockeying for throughout basically the second half of this episode, whether it's, quite literally putting someone's nose in a pair of needle nose pliers, or
that was brutal. That's pretty big. I don't have a lot of like, I watched one of the Terrifier movies. I actually watched all the Terrifier movies this past week, Mike. So I am immune to, I think, violence at this point. And yet still, every once in a while, a little thing will get me. We're like, yep, my knees are weak because he's putting pliers right at that part of his nose.
That's the thing. It feels like from a body horror perspective, and I am by no means more expert, but like the more realistic it gets, the less fantastical it is, the more it really does ping on the heartstrings. Like for me, it was always in Black Swan when Natalie Portman's character has like a little piece of skin at her nail button, so she rips at it and then eventually like rips her whole hand apart or something. But I digress. So with Oz doing that, he quite literally at the end is able to cause a power rerouting, was able to disseminate the power down to the poorer sides of Gotham, which is what he is petitioning to do this entire time. So I really liked it as a metaphor as well, because again, they're quite literally getting frozen out right now. Oz is really trying to kindle a flame underground with the bliss. But even that, the generators are kicking, the lights are turning off. These Sullivan boys are getting hung and nobody wants to sell bliss. And so even as much as we talked about last week, like, all right, Oz is on the up and up, he does undergo a bit of textbook struggle here, where like it's sort of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, where then he has to sort of then downgrade himself to, okay, let's just do the first taste is free for the entire town, get everyone in Gotham addicted to bliss. and then also ping on the radar of all of these, gang lords so that we can have our big summit later on.
Yeah, I mean the thematic resonance of it being literally power that is trying to happen is very, very strong, to the point that I'm almost a little disappointed that there's one line in this episode that I thought was so on the nose, and it's not the pliers. It might as well have been pliers, which is the moment where like they've just found out that the guys on the corner have died. They've been all like hung upside down, and he's like, "Oh man, I couldn't get rid of that. I couldn't. Nobody would take Bliss if whatever." It's like, how do you know that? You don't know. You actually don't know. Like, you literally just found out people died. Like, it's probably true, but that's to set up the line of like no one will take it even if I gave it away for free. Right? Is the line
Right.
something like that? And he's like, but what if I did give it away for free? And I'm like, that line is only in there to deliver. The first line is only in there to then deliver the setup of
That's
the
the thing.
second
Like,
line.
Grace, you and I are my brother and me fans. It gave very much unless
Unless.
energy.
Yes, very much so, which is fine. Again, the show is like, it's like when I'm nitpicking something, it like bothers me for 1 second of the whole episode, which I think is pretty good. That's my only problem with that with that thing. But the thematic thing, and to the point where I think the thematic resonance is really strong, which is, Mike, when the power does come back on and it plays the music that he's been trying to play for his mother to basically like help her and support her, what happens? Well, they're suddenly in the most amount of danger.
Yep.
A very similar. It's not as if like as close to the thing of like, that like Sophia's only able to find them because the power goes on. And it's like, that's the power. We shall go take them down. Like, it's not quite that, but it is literally the moment the power comes back on that now Vic and his and Francis are in the most danger they've been in, probably over the course of the entire show.
Oh yeah,
So,
I mean, we were just waiting for that other shoe to drop, right? When we got like the tracking shot of the two of them dancing in the doorway. Like, it was so joyful and so wholesome that I'm like, something's coming. Like, I was waiting for Sophia to just step in frame and start like bludgeoning Vic to death with a crowbar. That's how much I was holding my breath. And luckily, we're not there yet, at least. But they always say it's darkest just before the dawn. I guess here it's the most bright before we might turn to the dimmest part of the show next episode.
Well, this is the classic mob movie thing of like, the more that you move up the hierarchy, the more danger it is, because anybody thinks that they can take you down and take your spot. And so it's not exactly that, but this is it. This is Oz is trying to make a big move and knows that people are after him. And this is the thing with a lot of these stories, which is that when you do that, the people you love are the most vulnerable to suffer because of the choices you are making. And this is where Oz has placed himself. I thought throughout the episode, I think that I totally agree with you, Deidre O'Connell here being a real surprise for me in the show. I was not super keen. Like, I just wasn't sure whether this story was going to work for me. It is really working. I think Oz, another moment of it that I liked was the way in which Oz's insecurities came out, in terms of Vic tries to do this thing of saying, "Oh no, like your son is gone. He's gone down."
Trying to like yes and her episodes basically.
And like, I have not dealt directly with someone living with dementia. My grandfather was in a care home, and we would visit him often enough where like we'd come, but like not a lot of those moments where like I'm then fully responsible to like figure out how to go. And I presume that like the way Vic does it is what seems like it could work, but I don't think it feels great to do it, to like sort of play pretend. And Oz gets very upset in a way. And actually, I think there's a couple of times this episode that I thought is pretty excellently weaved in, which is as like Vic is helping with Oz's mom, and as Oz is dealing with both his mom and everything else that's going on, their story continues with these very small moments. The first being when he comes to talk about Squid, and Oz kind of is talking about something else before being like, "Oh, do you need help with that thing?" And he's like, "No." He's like, Vic's like, "I got it." And this moment too, where he like sort of stops Vic from responding to and supporting his mom in the way that Oz wants her to be supported. I thought all this was really excellent.
Yeah, I mean, what really pinged for me was the last scene really between the two, which is when Vic comes back post Squid killing, and Oz very clearly sees basically like, yeah, you did your first kill. Yeah, that guy you ran over with the car didn't count. This was your first out and out murder. And the fact that he like gives him, first some hardening advice of like, it'll get easier, to then actually physically embracing him, to then saying like, just get some rest. It felt, we've talked a lot about, the fact that Vic does not have any parental figures, but this almost to me seemed like a brotherly dynamic. Like, especially that first
Yeah.
thing that you're talking about, right? Like when Vic goes to Oz, it very much gave me shades of, okay, do I ask my older brother to like help me with this bully that's at school? No, I can go take care of it myself. And I know there's a big
Yeah.
age difference between the two, but I think especially given that we know a lot more about Oz's trauma and relationship with his brothers than his father, maybe that's
Yeah.
what's causing me to sort of project that
No,
relationship.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's like you could look at it and be like, oh, it's like a father son, but it's not. Like Vic didn't have a terrible relationship with his father, and so there
No.
was this like disagreement about some things, but for the most part, it actually seemed like pretty cordial. And so I don't think that that is sort of the void that maybe Vic. I mean, his father has passed away, so there definitely is like a parental void missing there. But I do think it's interesting to look at, like, there's been so much about Oz's brothers, and less so about their dad, which you would think that, like, if we
Yeah.
were playing into the parental thing, and it can be shades of both, but if we were mostly playing on the parental, you would think that there'd be a lot of like, that's the way my dad treated me, so I'm not gonna treat you like that. But it's not. It's like a lot of this like stuff about, this is what me and my brothers used to do, is we used to get into trouble under the sewer. I think
Yeah.
I think your point that it's a brotherly dynamic is interesting. And I love this scene being juxtaposed. It comes right after the scene with Eve and Sophia, where they have this like understanding of each other, and in a way you could argue like this sisterhood understanding of like who they're. And then you cut to this thing, and this is where I was saying it's not just that we get this moment of the two of them being like, we've been effed over by all the men, and then be like,
Mhm.
and she's like, this is where he is, go to Crown Point, like, and feeling like, am I rooting for Sophia? Because we then get the scene where what Oz tells him is like, it gets easier, kid. It's like
Yeah,
that.
you did the right thing. You protected those that you care about. I mean, that was also the monologue that he gives Vic in the beginning, right? Which is basically like, no, the way that we're running things, like we have Crown Heights on our side because we have loyalty and we have love. And so it's just this like reminder to Vic about how you did a bad thing, but for good reasons. So don't worry about it. You did it out of love.
Which is not like entirely. I think like if you're in this world, the right move might have been to get rid of Squid. Like if you're really committed to this world, probably the right move probably is to get rid of Squid.
They say
Probably.
the best way to engage in the Squid Game is not to play at all.
I've heard that. I'm gonna engage in this Squid Game again. It's coming out in December. So, um, I did really like that scene. That was really powerful, and I'm very impressed with the acting here, because I thought that the look that Vic has when he shows up from Renzi Feliz, the look of just like, I killed a guy, is very harrowing. Um,
Yeah.
he said at the screening that I saw where he did a Q&A, he's like, it gets much darker from here, and it becomes less funny. And yeah, I feel like he might have been internalizing all that, because his whole character has basically been like, don't leave with your girlfriend, kill a guy,
Yeah, I mean,
sell drugs.
it's
Yeah,
it's been that he has sort of been an not an audience analog, but like sort of the paragon of corruption. That
yeah.
like this was a
Mhm.
relatively good-natured
He
kid
could
who
have
was,
literally got on a bus and
yeah,
left.
he was
Mhm.
just trying to make ends meet in this really tough neighborhood, who has been reduced to nothing. He's lost everything, and so the person that is offering him this opportunity to become something, he's taken it, but at what cost? I mean, I think he did a really great job playing up even the killing of Squid, where like I wouldn't say necessarily it was as reflexive as what Oz does in the cold open of the series when he kills Alberto, which really just seemed like he got pushed too far. It seemed more so from Vic's perspective. He's like, I can't let this happen. I mean, that's what he even kind of like tells Squid as he's bleeding out, which is basically like, why did you do that? You left me no choice. Why did you keep poking me like that? And so to see the remorse on his face as he had to go in and do that. I mean, that's also the tough thing as well, was that it's the classic scenario we get about not hunting, or like the first time we see characters kill someone and that they don't do a great job the first time, right? Like he does brandish the gun and shoot, but he nicks his neck. So he's like slowly bleeding out. And so poor Vic has to then keep going in and like really finish him off and really succinctly tell yourself that you killed this man in cold blood. It's really tough. As skeezy as Squid was, he was a firm representation to Vic of the life that he had led prior to him meeting Oz Cobb. And that has quite literally been severed. and now he has almost taken on a new identity. And I'm very intrigued to see what that identity is going to represent in the final 2 episodes.
Yeah, agreed. I thought the for as much as I'm like, oh, I feel like his relationship with Vic, I'm like, oh, it makes me feel not great. I do love the sentiment he's giving, which I said this last week. Yeah, it is last week when Sophia like dumps all the money on the table. It is interesting that they're kind of both giving these like similar. They're kind of approaching the way forward to earn the respect and trust in a similar way. Probably because they're both between Sophia and Oz, because they are both they're not at exactly the same level, but they need to establish themselves as like the kingpin, queenpin
Mhm.
of Gotham essentially. And so Sophia's like dumping out all the money on the table, and being like, "This is yours. They took it from you." And essentially, it's exactly what Oz does this episode, of
Yeah.
basically giving a very similar speech, but to all of these fellow you know groups, these families, cartels, etc., to convince them to come on board. So it's very interesting that they're both kind of playing from the same playbook, Mike.
That's the thing. Again, these 2 trains, they're going to the same destination. It seems that whether or not that destination is life or death, we shall see. But yeah, they both. I mean, they ran in the same circles for some time. I think they both have like a fundamentally similar way of seeing the world and seeing their position in the world. But the way that they are able to utilize the same tactics to get what they want, I agree, is very fun. And especially also showing like it doesn't necessarily matter what tax bracket you fall into. An incentive is an incentive. So whether it is, Sophia trying to get in the pocket of these goons, but like higher income goons, or whether it is Oz trying to really rally all of these, low lives in Crown Point, they're both driven by the almighty dollar at the end of the day. And the idea that, like, yeah, the fat cats that were holding out on you, they're not going to be holding out on you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of loved it because they're both. Yeah, they're both. I mean, makes sense. This is what you would need to do if you were sort of like trying to establish yourself as the head of crime in Gotham. Is you need to earn the trust of all these people, and then eventually just probably lord over them. Lord over them. And they're both making some arguments about each other, right? That like, but Oz is saying like he doesn't care, like she doesn't care about you. And he's saying he doesn't care about you. They're each saying
Yeah.
this thing to other people of like you actually can't trust them. So I don't know. We've talked about this a lot of like, where are we going and what's the end game and who's going to die and all of that stuff. But this does feel like the penultimate episode. There is the world where next one is a very explosive episode, or it could be held until the finale. And the thing I was going to say earlier is not that anything has been confirmed, but Lauren LaFranc has basically said if HBO was willing, there's more story to explore here.
Oh, now explore here as in this character or in the city of Gotham?
Well, let's pull up what she said. Because yeah, she basically also there was some stuff this week about John Turturro deciding not to return, but we don't have to get into that.
Well,
But
I think we've kind of plumbed the dry well that was Carmine Falcone. We got like the last little itty bit of water out of there.
yeah, Gotham is ripe to tell so many stories. The comics have shown that through decades and decades. I love this version of Gotham too. I love all the characters that we've gotten to explore in this world. I think there's always room for more of that. Talking specifically about the Penguin season 2, if the story can be even better, absolutely. So that is the quote that she makes. So it doesn't. I mean, so my theory that we've talked about has been basically like you could anthologize the show. You could just like it could just
Yeah.
become
Gotham colon the Penguin, Gotham colon,
the
I guess not
Hangman or whoever,
that
but
Gotham colon, like bring some Gotham colon Two Face, bring Harvey Dent into this. We saw a little bit of the political side of things this episode with a corrupt councilman.
yeah, and the ratings on the show, both critically, like from a like an audience wise, from like Rotten Tomatoes, is extremely high, both in the 90s. IMDb for a while had episode 4 as one of the highest rated television shows of all time. Mike, it has
Of
since
all
dropped.
time.
It did since drop to a 9.5, but for a while it was rated at a 9.9, I think, until and then eventually,
Wow.
yeah, and so some stuff.
Listen, DC bros cut both ways, it seems.
Well, the thing that I think is interesting about this is that there is the way in which like a lot of this stuff has the potential. Like, I don't love the idea that like oh, the like the DC bros don't hate it, we better do a bunch more. Like, like
Right.
that's a dangerous game to play as well. Of like, don't make them, because I think that like we're cutting off a little bit of our creative arm, to make sure that we don't
Well,
like
yeah.
rile up a group of people. But
I
at
mean,
the same
listen, yeah, let's
time,
tell that to Disney and their announcement about doing these focus groups to determine like what they should be doing next. Yeah, oftentimes like it's a bit of like a lagging indicator rather than a leading indicator sometimes of like don't necessarily follow what, these people are saying are the best told stories. Make the stories that you want to make, and something that is well made like this, I think is deserving a lot of acclaim. And I mean, it also depends on like how the next two episodes go as well as to, this, as we find out, this episode is a pretty rife criminal underbelly of Gotham. Not to say that like
yep.
people are tuning into a Triad spin-off show, but like there's certainly room to talk a lot about what's going on in this city, especially considering how stratified it is.
Yeah, and so this thing of like Colin Farrell joking, like, and I know it like got blown up, but he really is like, no, I really hated it. I really hated being in the
Please
prosthetics.
stop.
Like, I went back and reread it just to be like, were we blowing this out of proportion? He's like, I hated it, and it was not just the prosthetics. It was also he is not quite method, but he just does find himself like he feels like he gets absorbed, and he's like kind of like it's hard for him to turn off who he's trying to be. Actually, this episode I was actually really impressed. There's a moment when he's talking with his mom where he's like welling up with tears, and I was like, that's a guy in a bunch of prosthetics.
Are we sure he's not just in pain from all the prosthetics weighing him down? No, I
hate
absolutely love that scene. Not to derail too much, can we talk about that scene though? Because it's like,
Yes.
I mean, these are glimpses that we've gotten in the past. That what's so interesting is whenever Frances is somewhere else, in a manner of speaking, she is personified as a bit lost, but a lot softer. Maybe it's because she is living in either a distant past, or as she's saying, like maybe she's kind of just in this purgatorial state where she's like seeing people from her past in the present, and it makes her confused, but it distinctly softens her edges. When she is at her most lucid, she is the most hardened, stern character maybe on the show, to be quite candid, as we see in this scene where she is, she is screaming for help. It is something that often does get talked about sometimes about like the in fact there's a book about it that like makes you cry about the full circle element of like, parents carry their children for so long until they learn to walk, and then hopefully you live long enough to have your children then carry you. And we see that as a moment with Oz, a little bit of a role reversal from, again, the parent-child dynamic that we are used to. And it fuels Francis enough, though maybe it was also hours of sitting in cold water that did this, to tell him basically like, no, I will get the final say as to what happens to me. You are going to kill me. No ifs, ands, or buts. And, we have always talked about how Francis was sort of like, I wouldn't say Oz's Achilles heel, but as much as Sal was, morosely complaining and smashing golf clubs about the fact that he took everything away from me, he has nothing. No, he has her. And it's clear that he has like devoted 100% of his heart to her. And so you see for really the first time, like we could say the conversation with him and Vic was maybe a little bit of posturing of him trying to sell like, yeah, you don't want to go, like, don't you're going to miss all this stuff when I'm gone. But here you could tell that like, and this might be something that happens, or maybe Sophia robs this opportunity of him, but like he was clearly incredibly emotionally conflicted at the pure idea of having to grant Francis's request. And remember, this is the same guy who about 20 minutes later in the episode is going to tell Vic, yeah, it's okay that you killed that person because you were doing it for the people that you love. What happens when the people that you love tell you to do the unthinkable to them?
Yeah, and I don't know if people caught this, but there's a moment when Sal is saying like, what the hell does he love? And Sophia goes, his brother's died, his mom's dead, haven't heard about his father in a while. And like, it's like, so there's been this story out there that his mom is not around, which is not, Sophia's now going to learn, that has learned, that's not true. Otherwise, they might have just been looking for his mom. So I think that's very interesting heading into the next episode. But I agree with you. This is very powerful. This is very strong. It's really just like, it's just sad. The bathtub scene is so horrifically sad of imagining that she ended up in the bathtub and there's no power, and so it's just cold. It's up there. The dichotomy between Frances when she is forgetting or not entirely herself or has these moments is the sadness of like, and I think there's this really, I don't think it's unintentional that Vic has been spending so much time with Frances. I think that there's a world where like, yeah, it's like take care of my mom, kid. Like that's one thing, but we see a lot of scenes and there's this like tenderness that she has to Vic sometimes as well. Like when they're eating breakfast and she sort of pats him like on the cheek, and then when they're dancing at the end of the episode. And we talked about like Vic getting on the bus and leaving, and like these moments that Frances has had like the most like joy she's having are these moments where she's like, not,
Yeah.
I mean, there's the moment at the end where she's like, oh, he did it. But I don't even know if she really understands exactly what he did. It's more just this like, oh my God, my son did it for me. Of like, but you imagine what her life maybe what you get these moments of like, if they weren't in this world, if they weren't in this situation, if they weren't caught up in all of this, what their life could have been like versus like the reality of what the situation is and the way that Frances had to be because of all of the stuff, you know, that the Cobbs got into in general. That it's like there's a version of her that if they went one way, she remains this sort of soft, sweet, loves dancing to music character, as opposed to the version where she's saying like, no, you got to do it, you got to kill them all, you got to cut that, like, oh my God, you did it, in a way that I think is like very interesting to juxtapose that with Vic, who's right on the beginning and basically crosses the line this episode of like he's in it, and that
Yeah.
feels to me not great. That feels not great.
Yeah. So then let's look ahead here, Grace, because we are left on a very captivating image of two of Oz's most important people in his life being caught unawares, caught dancing metaphorically with their pants down as Sophia is standing there with a crowbar. Are we going to get, a full episode of like her holding them captive in the apartment until Oz comes home? Do you think we're immediately jumping into action? Because we saw that with Eve, Sophia was someone that was definitely going to ask questions first before shooting. Is she conditioned to do the same here, or is she more so now so fueled with rage and revenge against him that she says, take care of what you need to and sort everything out after the fact?
Yeah, this to me is the most, it's a very interesting place to put, to leave us before we come back for a week, because specifically I'm thinking about the way in which the crux of Sophia, a lot of Sophia's decisions this season has been about the way that her mom was treated. And so now you face the situation where Sophia's watching Oz's mom.
Yeah.
And is Oz's mom the one who is to, like, does she deserve to suffer here? Or like what happened to Sophia's mom, was she the victim of a situation that she couldn't figure out how to get out of, and it cost
Oh,
her life?
interesting.
And so like I wonder whether next week we get a little bit more info about like Oz's dad and the brothers too. Like I wonder if there's just more of that, because like if there's this like, as potentially facing death. I just don't I I mean, in one way you could maybe I could figure out how to move the puzzle pieces around to make it thematically fit that like Sophia kills Frances. I just don't think Sophia kills Oz's mom. That's like, I had this moment when she's like sitting across from Eve and she's holding a gun, and I thought she was going to kill Eve.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting being like, oh, that's like, for me in this moment, there's been this story that had been told about Sophia is not, again, so much of this is I'm not who you think I am. And
Yep.
so Sophia goes through so much effort to be like, I'm not who you all think I am. Ultimately, you could argue maybe killing her whole family is the moment where she's like, I'm the hangman. But then I feel like this episode, it doesn't, I don't know, everybody that she's killed so far were the people who should have known better than to assume she was a murderer serial killer, or knew she wasn't and was willing to let people assume she was as bad as people thought she was. I don't think that's like that. To me, the moment of her killing her family does not then mean she goes like, she doesn't choose to kill Eve, because she's not just fundamentally like a serial killer. Like she's not just,
Right.
So this leads me to a very interesting place, I think, at the end of this episode, in terms of like, how does Sophia manage finding out that what drives Oz the most is his mom, basically, of like wanting a good life for his mom and himself, but a big part of that is his mom. So I think it's a very interesting.
I will hedge on the side of I do think she kills Oz's mom. I don't think it'll
I
be
think
like
Francis is dead next episode. I don't know that I would say that it's for sure. So like Sophia kills Francis. There could also be the world where like Oz is pretty damn sure that Sophia killed Francis, and once again we're in the situation of like Sophia be like, I did kill them.
yeah,
But
please stop. I'm not the
Mhm.
hangman. I promise. I only killed a handful of people that one time. And then I
Yeah.
also hung those 3 guys.
And I did,
But other
yeah,
than
that's
that,
right. That's right. They did hang upside down. That's right.
but
That's right.
for me, I could see the symbology of not only the fact that like Sophia has a connection to her mother, and much like Vic killing Squid, this would be a representation of her like truly severing all the past trauma that she had connected with the Falcones of like, you're a Gigante, but you're also a Falcone at the end of the day. But also, it could be really interesting in that we have this entire dynamic of Oz and Francis, where Francis, whatever she is the most lucid, she is disparaging her son. Like, there are a couple moments of tenderness, but it's usually like, hey, don't be a P word and kill me. Oh, you're a loser if you don't do this. And so, like, imagine if the final impression she gets is like, I gave you one job and you couldn't even do that. Someone else had to kill me. You didn't kill me. And how much that would linger in Oz's mind of like, the person you love most in the world is dead and you couldn't even grant her last wish. That would be a big meal to make. Either way, I think it's going to be a really great episode. This is the first time in a while that, assumingly if Oz shows up, like all 4 of these main characters are going to be interacting in the same space together, which is going to be very fun as well because Oz, he has become a master of like keeping certain pieces of information at arm's length from certain individuals in his life while also, being able to cover up other stuff that he's doing. That's the whole thing with Eve. That's why Eve ends up giving away his location because he did not reveal everything that was going on with the real hangman. And so it could be a situation where Oz gets fully unmasked in front of Deidre, or Francis, I should say, and her reaction will be incredibly interesting. And then I'm intrigued to see, like, how do we move forward into a finale from there? There's one flag I want to plant. Granted, it's a
Yes,
little outlandish, but hear
please.
me out here. Because we got mentioned, I'm not sure if it was mentioned in the show. I think it was in the movie about this Elliott Bridge, like the bridge between the
The
poorer parts of town and
the
the
bridge
richer
got
parts
mentioned in
of
this
town.
episode, but specifically, he says to the O'Sullivan, he says like, they're over there on the other side of the bridge. Your family, your ancestors built this bridge. That's what he said. So it does get name dropped in this episode.
I think the bridge is going to get blown up.
Whoa, that's a fun one. It's fun.
I think either there's going to be a climax on the bridge where maybe they like trap a bunch of the rich bureaucrats or some of the high ranking mobsters while they're en route across the bridge, or in like an anarchical move out, right in the realm of the Riddler, who had only done this like a few months ago in canon. They just straight up blow up the bridge and like truly sever any connection between the rich and poor parts of town.
I think that when I was talking about the Batman the movie, and I believe this came from our friend Kevin Mahadeo, we were talking about like who would you want in the next version of the Batman, Batman Part 2. I believe we were talking, and I think that there was something to like, I think this was Kevin's thing of like, there's a villain that ties into specifically the idea of there's a story like this where like a specific part of Gotham gets basically like severed off and becomes its own little thing. And so I can't remember what it is, but if somebody else out there would like to message below as if that makes sense or if I'm like misremembering a detail there, but I think that's a good, I mean, thematically it makes a lot of sense to like severing of the two sides. Mike, the councilman who appears this episode does get his nose. Do you is that a familiar face you remember? Do you know who that is? Are you and I think you should leave fan, Mike?
Oh yeah, of course I am.
That is he does not sing The Night the Skeletons Came Alive, but I'm surprised that councilman does not presume that the bones are their money.
He was the one that was singing The Night That Something Shot Me Down.
Yes, he sings the nice version. Tim Robinson joins in with the Night the Skeletons Came to Life.
So this could be a metaphoric Night the Skeletons Came to Life. Where,
that's what I'm saying.
Underground, there's half as much food as this as they get to enjoy up there, and we'll see if we'll be pulling our hair up but not out at what's to come in the next 2 episodes.
Yeah, the day Robert Palin's murdered me.
That's the day Robert Palin's murdered me. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
that's the lead singer of that song. So
Wow.
yeah, I was I was like, who is that? That guy was so familiar. And then I was looking at the credits and searching everybody and found it is like the bones are their money. So yeah, very fun. All right, well, we'll be back next week with our episode 7, the penultimate episode of The Penguin, Mike. So until then, what else you got going on?
Lots of stuff. So now Josh Regler and I, we're officially back covering Battlestar Galactica, season 3, episode 1. And yeah, if you want to talk about a dark, depraved dystopia universe, who golly, we get thrown into another time jump, not even starker than wherever we are right now. Speaking of Starks, and winter is coming in Gotham. So Josh and I are covering that. Again, I have not seen Battlestar Galactica ever up to this point, so I am just making a bunch of guesses and first reactions along the way while Josh kind of sits there and bites on his tongue in gleeful fashion. So be sure to check that out. TV for Real this week, we had Jay Maya on, which was a really, really great discussion. Jay Maya is a huge fan of like classical works, and so we talked a lot about the art of adaptation and translation. A surprisingly heady discussion for the self-proclaimed party podcast of We Know Scripted TV, but be sure to check that out.
That's me at a party, Mike, being like, I know the music is really loud. I wish we could be talking about the book adaptation of this thing,
Oswald, turn off that music. I need to read my book. Other than that, my usual Survivor stuff on the B&B and on Parade, and you can check out, of course, everything I'm doing at a Mike Bloom Type.
Okay. Mike, of course, Tara and I are doing the Tastemakers each week. This week we will be unveiling the top 5 horror films, television shows, or other properties, if they are nominated, of the last year. So very excited. We have some Tastemaker ballots out with people whose opinions we trust, and they've submitted them. We'll tally them together and unveil the list and talk about anything else we're watching. And Mike, this is very exciting. People can check out some of my work now on Parade.com.
Yeah.
This is very exciting. Writing some
welcome to my definitely not criminal enterprise, but very happy to have you on board, Grace, writing about what you know best, TV, including people are speculating on if there's going to be a season 2 of The Penguin. Grace dropped some sound bites that she had so dutifully researched and wrote about over at Parade.
Yeah, I mean, as I say in the article, but the show is doing, we said it's critically doing very well. Audience reception is high, and people are watching it. I think it was, there's some data to show that it has more viewers for the first episode than the season 4 premiere of Succession. So
really?
But that's the season 4, but like still,
I mean, the power of IP, it'll get you far.
It really is, I think, honestly, is why. But it does feel like there's a lot of potential for the show to be returning, just whether or not they can get Colin Farrell to get back in the makeup. Speaking of, I think you should leave. He's like,
I was gonna say, just get Tim Robinson to say.
Yeah, could we just put Tim Robinson in the
and then just like have Colin Farrell do ADR?
Yeah, perfect. We nailed it. All right, well, that's it for us this week. Again, make sure you subscribe, tell a friend. Until next time, bye-bye. Wah, wah.